coffee on Providence tasted like regret and burnt circuitry. Miles Corbin didn't mind. It was familiar, a bitter anchor in a world that felt too clean, too new. He sat in a reinforced plastic chair outside a prefab dome that served as the colony's provisional Capitol building, watching the sky. It wasn't the blue of Earth, but a soft, pearlescent lavender, streaked with the silver tails of Aethel skimmers. Miles was a relic. A former Chicago PD detective, a man who'd spent 20 years knee-deep in the city's grime, he now found himself the de facto head of the Colonial Investigative Bureau. The CIB. It sounded impressive. In reality, it was him, two junior officers who still thought gazing at the Aethel starspires was a religious experience, and a server room that hummed with more anxiety than purpose. His job mostly involved settling disputes over hydroponic allotments and investigating the occasional faulty enviro suit. He took another sip of the sludge in his mug. His real job, the one he'd been unofficially assigned by Governor Anya Sharma, was to be a human lie detector. Specifically, for the Aethel. Humanity's first contact with an intelligent alien species hadn't been a war. It hadn't been a grand, cinematic moment of arrival. It had been a business meeting. The Aethel, a race of graceful, humanoid beings who looked like they'd been sculpted from marble and starlight, had appeared in Earth's orbit one day and said, in perfect, unaccented English, "We've been observing. Your societal trajectory is inefficient. We propose an alliance." They offered technology that bordered on magic, clean energy, medical nanites that could rewrite cancerous cells, FTL drives that folded space like origami. The price? Access. A foothold. A small human colony on their newest terraformed jewel, a planet they'd named Xylos and humans had, with typical lack of imagination, called Providence. 5 years later, here they were. A human outpost of 50,000 souls, living in the shadow of a civilization that made humanity look like a toddler that had just discovered fire. The Aethel were everything humans weren't: serene, logical, immortal. They had no crime, no poverty, no conflict. Their society was a symphony of perfect harmony. And it drove Miles Corbin nuts. No one was that perfect. It was a violation of the first rule he'd ever learned on the Force: everybody lies. Miles. He didn't turn. He knew the voice. Dr. Eris Thorne moved with a quiet efficiency that still felt alien to him. She was the colony's lead xenoanthropologist, a woman whose mind was a library of alien cultures and whose tongue could untangle the most convoluted Aethel social protocols. She was also his unofficial partner on the Aethel problem. "Eris," he grunted, finally looking up. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She held a data slate, its glow illuminating the sharp lines of her face. "You're going to wear a hole in that cup," she said, nodding at his mug. "It's the only thing on this rock with any character." A small, rare smile touched her lips. "Character is just a polite word for flawed." "Exactly. And I like flaws. They're where the truth is." He gestured for her to sit. "What's on the docket today?" "Another lecture on how Aethel gestural subtleties can indicate deep-seated emotional states that they claim not to have." "Worse," she said, her tone dropping. "We have a body." Miles set his mug down. The ceramic clinked against the plastic table. Human or Aethel? Aethel. That got his full attention. In 5 years, not a single Aethel had died a violent, or even an unexpected, death on Providence. They were biologically immortal, their bodies maintained by internal nanite colonies. To die was a choice, a rare ritual they called the final receding. Where? The consulate. In the grand atrium. Miles stood, stretching his back. The CIB didn't have jurisdiction inside the Aethel consulate. It was sovereign territory, a slice of the Aethel homeworld transplanted onto Providence. If it's on their turf, it's their case. Why are they calling us? They're not, Eris said, her eyes locked on his. Governor Sharma is. The Aethel are calling it an accident. A catastrophic cellular cascade. A 1 in a trillion biological malfunction. And you don't believe them? I don't believe in 1 in a trillion, she said. Especially not when the victim is a harmonizer. Miles felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The harmonizers were the Aethel ruling council. The top of the pyramid. A member of their inner circle, dead of an accident on a human-controlled planet? That wasn't an accident. It was a message. Or a mistake. And in his experience, powerful entities didn't make mistakes. They just covered them up. Let's go, he said, his voice low. Let's go see this perfect, flawless accident. The Aethel consulate was less a building and more a work of art. It seemed to be grown from a single, pearlescent crystal, its walls smooth and seamless, arching up into a central dome that filtered the lavender light into a soft, golden glow. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, unidentifiable. There was no sound. No hum of machinery, no distant chatter, just a profound, weighty silence. Miles hated it immediately. They were met by an Aethel named Kalen. He was the consul's liaison to the human government, a being of serene beauty with silver hair that fell like liquid metal to his shoulders. His eyes were the color of a twilight sky, and they held an unnerving stillness. Detective Corbin. Dr. Thorne, Kalen said, his voice a smooth, melodic tenor that seemed to resonate directly in their bones. It was a common Aethel trait. Their communication was a blend of vocalization and low-level telepathic projection, designed for clarity and to avoid misunderstanding. It was also, Miles had found, incredibly effective at conveying condescension without a hint of it in the words themselves. Kalen, Miles replied, keeping his own voice flat. He refused to play their telepathic games. We were told there was an incident. An unfortunate tragedy, Kalen corrected, gliding through the atrium. A private matter. Your presence is unnecessary, but at the governor's insistence, we will cooperate. Miles and Eris followed him. The grand atrium was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive, floating sculpture of interlocking light patterns that shifted and reformed in hypnotic patterns. Aethel, dressed in simple, flowing robes of white and silver, stood or sat in quiet contemplation, their faces masks of placid calm. They didn't even look up as the trio passed. It was like walking through a gallery of exquisite, life-sized dolls. The body was in a side chamber, cordoned off by a shimmering energy field that rippled like water. The Aethel on the floor was tall, even for his kind, dressed in the intricate silver robes of a harmonizer. He looked peaceful. There was no blood, no wound, no sign of struggle. He could have been sleeping. The harmonizer Valerius, Kalen said, his tone tinged with a manufactured sorrow. His biological matrix simply ceased to function. A rare and unforeseen entropy cascade. Miles knelt, studying the scene. The Aethel form was humanoid, but more slender, with longer limbs and a delicate bone structure. Valerius's skin was pale, almost translucent. Miles looked closely at his face, at his wide, unblinking eyes. They were fixed on the ceiling, but it wasn't the vacant stare of the dead. It was a look of sheer, absolute terror. Entropy cascade, huh? Miles murmured, mostly to himself. Looks like he saw a ghost. Our physiology is complex, Detective, Kalen said smoothly. What appears to be an emotional response is merely a muscular spasm as the system fails. Eris knelt beside Miles, her own gaze analytical. She pointed a slim scanner at the body, its light tracing the Aethel's form. Cellular degradation is simultaneous. Across all systems at once. It's not a cascade. It's an event. An event? Kalen echoed, a flicker of something, annoyance, in his otherwise placid expression. Yes. As if every cell in his body was instructed to die at the exact same moment, Eris said, not looking up from her scanner. That's not a biological malfunction. That's a command. Miles stood up and faced Kalen. A command from whom? Kalen's twilight eyes met Miles's. The telepathic projection intensified, a wave of calm, rational reassurance washing over Miles, a feeling that said, "This is nothing. You are overreacting. Go back to your coffee." Miles gritted his teeth, focusing on the burnt taste still in his mouth, the memory of Chicago's grimy streets, the visceral reality of his own flawed existence. He pushed back against the mental wave, a stubborn, defiant rock in an ocean of serenity. The only one who could issue such a command would be the individual himself, as part of the final receding, Kalen said, his voice never wavering. But Harmonizer Valerius had no such intentions. His work on the human-Aethel integration accords was too vital. This is, as we said, a tragedy. A flaw in an otherwise perfect design. A flaw, Miles repeated, his voice hard. Right. We'll need to see his personal logs, his recent communications, a full manifest of who he met with in the last cycle. Kalen's serene expression finally cracked, just a fraction. That is not possible. Aethel personal records are sacrosanct. They are sealed upon an individual's passing, to preserve their psychic integrity. Bullshit, Miles said, the word sharp and ugly in the silent hall. You've got a dead politician on your hands, in a place where no one is ever supposed to die. And you're telling me the case is closed before it's even opened? You're not hiding a tragedy, Kalen. You're hiding a murder. The accusation hung in the air, stark and raw. The few Aethel in the atrium finally turned, their placid faces now regarding the humans with a unified, unnerving focus. The pressure in the room increased, the low-level telepathic hum sharpening into a palpable wave of disapproval. "Detective," Eris said softly, a warning in her tone. "Easy." But Miles was done playing nice. He'd seen this dance 100 times back on Earth. The powerful closing ranks, the stonewalling, the quiet threats. The only difference was the accent. Kalen's posture remained relaxed, but his eyes had gone cold. "You are out of your depth, detective. You are applying your primitive, confrontational logic to a situation you cannot possibly comprehend. This matter is closed. I will ask you to leave." He didn't wait for an answer, turning and gliding away, leaving them standing before the shimmering field and the body of the harmonizer who looked far too scared to have died of a simple flaw. Miles watched him go, his jaw tight. He looked at Eris, who was studying her scanner with a deep frown. "What is it?" he asked. "Something weird," she said, her voice low. "I found a residue. Microscopic. On his skin, in the air around him. It's not Aethel. It's not human. The scanner can't identify it. It's organic, but the protein chains are like nothing I've ever seen." Miles looked from the body to Eris, then back at the silent, watching Aethel. A flaw in a perfect design. An unidentified organic residue. A cover-up. He'd been right. Everybody lies. And the Aethel were the most accomplished liars he had ever met. Back in the sterile confines of the CIB office, the silence felt different. It wasn't the serene, oppressive quiet of the Aethel consulate, but the familiar, buzzing silence of a server room and an active mind at work. Eris had the unidentified residue projected on a large holographic display, its complex molecular structure slowly rotating in the air. "It's elegant," she murmured, tracing a strand of the protein chain with her finger. "Look at the bonding. It's incredibly stable, but also reactive. It's almost like it's designed to interface with something." "Interface with what?" "Aethel biology?" Miles asked, pacing the length of the small office. He'd shed his formal jacket and rolled up his sleeves, the restless energy of a new case thrumming through him. "Possibly. But it's not a poison. The cellular scan showed no signs of a toxic agent. It's more like a key. A key that fits a lock we don't know exists." Miles stopped pacing and stared at the hologram. Kalen called it a flaw in the design. What if he was telling the truth, but not the whole truth? What if Valerius wasn't murdered, but broken? Broken how? Think about it, Eris. These people are perfect. Immortal. No crime, no conflict. That's not natural. It's a system. And every system has a pressure point. What if this residue is the thing that found the pressure point? What if it's not a weapon, but a virus? A piece of information that shatters their perfect harmony? Eris looked at him, her expression thoughtful. A mimetic virus. A concept, an idea, transmitted biologically. The Aethel are telepathic, to a degree. What if this isn't a physical agent, but a psychic one? A thought that kills. Now we're talking, Miles said, a grim satisfaction settling over him. A murder weapon with no fingerprints, no gunpowder. Just an idea. That's a new one, even for me. The problem was proving it. They had a dead alien, a cover-up, and a microscopic mystery particle. They had no leverage, no jurisdiction, and no way to access the one thing that could tell them what Valerius was doing before he died, his personal files. Kalen won't give us anything, Eris stated, echoing his thoughts. To them, we're noisy children demanding to see the blueprints for their starship. Then we don't ask, Miles said. He walked over to his desk and pulled a small, encrypted comms unit from a locked drawer. It was a burner, untraceable, a relic from his Chicago days that he'd never gotten rid of. Old habits died hard. We need someone on the inside. Someone who doesn't buy the party line. Eris watched him, her brow furrowed. You think you have a source? In the Aethel consulate? Not yet. But I know how to find one. He began typing a coded message onto the device's small screen. Every perfect society has cracks. People who don't fit. People who have secrets. People who are willing to trade those secrets for something they want. The Aethel are no different. They just hide it better. He finished the message and hit send. It was a simple query, routed through half a dozen dead drop servers across the colony, a digital whisper in the dark. It was addressed to a persona he'd been cultivating for over a year. He didn't know who they were, only that they were an Aethel who frequented the human sectors of Providence, observing, listening. Miles had left a trail of breadcrumbs, small pieces of human culture, old jazz recordings, classic detective novels, even a bottle of Real, earth-grown bourbon, places where their paths might cross. He'd been fishing for a long time. Now, he was finally putting a hook in the water. The message was simple, there was a flaw in the design. I'm looking for the architect, what if they don't bite? Eris asked. They'll bite, Miles said, his confidence unwavering. Curiosity is a universal trait. And right now, I'm willing to bet there's at least one Aethel on this planet who is just as curious about this flaw as we are. They spent the next 6 hours running in circles. Eris continued her analysis of the residue, trying to find a match in any known biological database, human or Aethel. She came up empty. Miles pulled every public-facing log he could find on Harmonizer Valerius. The official record was pristine. Valerius was a paragon of Aethel virtue, a diplomat, a philosopher, a key architect of the alliance with humanity. There were hours of footage of him speaking at ceremonies, his voice a calm, soothing drone, his message one of unity and shared prosperity. It was perfect propaganda. And, to Miles, perfectly boring. It was late, the lavender sky outside darkening to a deep indigo, when the burner unit chimed. Miles snatched it up. A single line of text appeared on the screen, the characters glowing with a faint, internal light. The architect is long dead. But the blueprints are still in the library. Some sections are not for public viewing, Miles felt a jolt of adrenaline. It was a cryptic response, but it was a response. The library had to be the central Aethel data repository. The sections not for public viewing were what they needed. He typed back, "How do we get a library card?" The reply was almost instant. You don't. But the librarian is sometimes forgetful. The main archival core undergoes a diagnostic cycle in 6 of your hours. The security protocols on the sub-level archives are temporarily downgraded from impregnable to merely formidable. It was an invitation. A dangerous one. Eris, Miles said, looking up from the device. Pack your gear. We're going to the library. The Aethel Central Archive was a subterranean structure located several kilometers from the main consulate building. It was a windowless dome of the same pearlescent crystal, but it exuded an aura of cold, silent purpose rather than serene beauty. There were no guards, no visible security. The Aethel didn't believe in such crude measures. Their security was woven into the very fabric of their technology, a combination of psychic wards and quantum-encrypted systems that were, according to their own boasts, unbreakable. According to Miles's new source, that was about to change. They approached under the cover of the planet's long night, their vehicle, a standard, unassuming electric rover, parked behind a rocky outcrop a few hundred meters away. They were dressed in dark, non-reflective suits, their faces smudged with camouflage paint. It felt absurd, like trying to sneak into Fort Knox with a water pistol. The diagnostic cycle, Eris whispered, checking a chronometer on her wrist. It should be starting now. Lead the way, Miles said. You're the librarian. Eris approached a seamless section of the dome's wall. There was no door, no keypad. She placed her hand on the cool, smooth surface. Access request. Dr. Eris Thorne, Colonial Xenoanthropology. Research query, pre-integration Aethel socio-political structures. For a long moment, nothing happened. Miles held his breath. If their source was wrong, if this was a trap, silent alarms would already be screaming. Then, a section of the wall dissolved, not opening, but simply ceasing to be there, revealing a dark corridor beyond. A soft, internal light began to glow from the floor, guiding them inward. Formidable, Eris murmured, a wry smile on her face. Let's hope that's an Aethel understatement. The inside of the archive was a cathedral of information. Towering. Crystalline spires stretched up into a darkness lost from view, each one pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. Data streams, visible as shimmering threads of energy, flowed between the spires like rivers of light. There was no sound, only a profound sense of immense, silent knowledge. The main core is that way, Eris pointed down a central aisle. The sublevels should be below us. The source said the entrance would be unmarked. They moved quickly but silently, their footsteps making no sound on the glowing floor. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. It contained the recorded history of a civilization that had spanned millennia, the sum total of their art, their science, their philosophy. It was a historian's dream and a detective's nightmare. Finding one specific file in here would be like finding a single grain of sand on a beach. Here, Eris said, stopping at a blank wall between two towering data spires. She ran her hand over the surface. There's a seam. Almost invisible. Miles saw it too, a hairline fracture in the crystal. How do we open it? The same way we got in the front door, she said. With a little creative authority. She pulled a small device from her pack, a data spike she designed herself. It was a master key of sorts, capable of generating a flood of plausible, but ultimately false, authorization credentials. She plugged it into a nearly invisible port at the base of the wall. Working, she whispered, her fingers flying across a holographic interface projected from the device. The diagnostic cycle is creating system noise. I'm piggybacking our request onto it. It's like shouting during a thunderstorm. Miles stood watch, his hand resting on the sidearm he'd insisted on bringing. A useless gesture against a race that could kill with a thought, perhaps, but it made him feel better. The silence of the archive felt heavier now, more watchful. Got it, Eris breathed. The wall dissolved, revealing a narrow, dark staircase spiraling down into the earth. The sublevels were different. The air was colder, the light dimmer. The crystalline spires were gone, replaced by narrow corridors lined with solid-looking data vaults, each one sealed with a complex, glowing lock. This was the Aethel attic, the place where they stored the things they didn't want to look at. Valerius's personal logs should be in a vault key to his biometric signature, Eris said, consulting a schematic sheet pulled from the main network. It should be this way. They found the vault 3 corridors down. It was identical to the others, a seamless door with a glowing, circular lock in the center. "Can you open it?" Miles asked. "Not with the spike," Eris said, shaking her head. "This is a quantum-level lock. It requires a specific key, a unique quantum state that only Valerius possessed. We can't fake it." Miles felt a surge of frustration. They were so close. Then what was the point of all this? A guided tour of the alien basement? "Patience, Detective," Eris said, a glint in her eye. "Our source said the librarian was forgetful. They didn't say he'd leave the door open. But they did say he'd be forgetful." She pointed to a small maintenance panel next to the vault door. "During the diagnostic cycle, the system performs a backup of all vault access keys. It's a failsafe. The backup data is stored locally, in this panel, for a few microseconds before being wiped. It's a security vulnerability they consider statistically insignificant." "Insignificant is my specialty," Miles grunted. Eris got to work, her fingers a blur on the panel's interface. It was delicate work, a race against a clock that was counting down in microseconds. Miles watched her, admiring her focus. She was a different person in the field, the academic's detached curiosity replaced by a sharp, intense concentration. "Almost there," she whispered. A stream of data flashed across the small screen. "Got it. I have the key signature. Now I just have to replicate it in." She plugged the data spike into a port on the lock itself. "Feed it in." The glowing lock on the door flickered. For a heart-stopping second, it turned a violent red, and a low hum filled the corridor. A psychic alarm, silent but deafening, screamed in Miles's mind, a feeling of asterisk warning. Intrusion. Unauthorized, asterisk then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The light on the lock turned a placid green, and with a soft hiss of displaced air, the heavy door slid open. Inside was a small, dark chamber. In the center, on a single pedestal, floated a crystal that pulsed with a soft, silver light. It was no bigger than Miles's hand. "Is that it?" he asked. "That's it," Eris said, her voice filled with awe. "A psychic data crystal. Not just ones and zeros. Thoughts. Memories. Emotions. This is everything Valerius was." She reached out and carefully took the crystal. As her fingers brushed against its surface, her eyes widened. "What is it?" Miles asked, stepping forward. "It's warm," she whispered. "And I can feel something. A fragment. An echo of the fear." They didn't have much time. The diagnostic cycle would be ending soon. Eris secured the crystal in a shielded case and they retreated, sealing the vault behind them. They moved back through the silent, towering archive, their prize feeling heavy and dangerous in Eris's pack. As they emerged from the main entrance and back into the cool night air, the wall resealing itself behind them, Miles's burner unit chimed again. Asterisk, the librarian has noticed the missing book. The enforcers are being dispatched. I suggest you leave the library before they arrive, asterisk enforcers. Miles muttered, looking at Eris. I don't like the sound of that. Me neither, she said, her face pale in the dim light. Let's go. Now. They scrambled back to the rover, the silence of the Providence night no longer feeling peaceful, but hunted. They had the data. They had the ghost in the machine. But now, it seemed, the machine was starting to wake up. The ride back to the CIB office was tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every distant hum of an Aethel skimmer sounded like it was closing in on them. They made it back without incident, but the feeling of being hunted lingered. The CIB office was their fortress, a cluttered island of human chaos in the sea of Aethel order. Miles immediately activated the security protocols he had installed himself, old-school physical dampeners and white noise generators designed to disrupt low-level telepathic probing. It was the equivalent of tinfoil hats for the whole room, but it made him feel better. Eris placed the data crystal on a specialized reader in the center of the main lab table. It was a piece of equipment she designed to interface with non-human data formats. As she connected the leads, the crystal began to pulse more rapidly, its silver light filling the room. "It's heavily encrypted," she said, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "Not just digitally. Psychically. It's tied to Valerius's unique neural frequency. It's a lock that only he could open. Trying to force it could corrupt the data, or worse, wipe it clean." "So we stole a book we can't read," Miles said, pouring himself a cup of the sludgy coffee. "Great. I didn't say we couldn't read it," Eris countered, her eyes never leaving the screen. "I just said we can't force it. We need a key. Or a translator." She spent the next 12 hours trying to build one. She modeled neural pathways, ran simulations of Aethel cognitive processes, and attempted to create a digital interface that could mimic the psychic resonance of the crystal's owner. It was like trying to replicate a person's soul from a photograph. Progress was slow. Miles, meanwhile, was trying to figure out who the enforcers were. He dug through every piece of intelligence the CIB had on the Aethel. Officially, there was no such thing. The Aethel had no police force, no army. Their social harmony was maintained by consensus and the gentle guidance of the harmonizers. "Bullshit," Miles said to the empty room. He knew better. Every utopia has its enforcers. They just call them by different names. The Ministry of Love. The Committee for Public Safety. The harmonizers. He found nothing. It was as if the enforcers were a ghost, a rumor. Which, in a way, made them even more frightening. On the third day, they caught a break. Governor Sharma herself came to the CIB office. Anya Sharma was a formidable woman, a former diplomat with a spine of steel and a mind like a razor. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Corbin, what the hell did you do?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. Kalen filed an official protest. "He's accusing the CIB of violating Aethel's sovereignty. He's demanding you be recalled to Earth." "Did he mention a dead harmonizer?" Miles shot back. "He's calling it a tragic accident. He's using your aggressive and unprofessional investigation as a smokescreen to put pressure on the colonial charter. He's threatening to review our entire alliance." "Let him," Miles said. "He's hiding something, Governor. Valerius didn't die of a flaw. He was killed. We have proof." He gestured to the data crystal on the table. Sharma looked at the glowing crystal, then at Eris, then back at Miles. Her expression was grim. "Proof you can't access. Proof you stole. This is a diplomatic nightmare, Miles." "A nightmare is what happens when you let the monsters under the bed fester," Miles said. "We need to know what's on that crystal. It's the only leverage we have." Sharma was silent for a long moment, weighing the political risks. Finally, she nodded. "You have 48 hours. 48 hours to give me something I can use. After that, I'm throwing you to the wolves to save this colony. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Miles said. After she left, the pressure in the room felt even more intense. 48 hours. It was a ticking clock. "I can't crack it," Eris said, slumping back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "The psychic encryption is too complex. It's not just a password. It's a state of being. I can't replicate Valerius's consciousness." "Then maybe we don't have to," Miles said, an idea forming. "Our source. The librarian. They got us in. Maybe they can get us the key." It was a risk. Contacting the source again so soon could expose them. But they were out of options. Miles sent another message on the burner. "Asterisk, the book is locked. We need the key." Asterisk, the response was quicker this time, more urgent. Asterisk, the key cannot be sent. It must be experienced. The enforcers are not a rumor. They are the silence. They are coming for you. There is a place. A place where the signal is weak. The old aqueduct system, Sector Gamma. Abandoned since the first year. Go there. Now, asterisk, Miles looked at Eris. We have to go. The aqueducts? That's a maze down there, she said. It's also the only place on this rock where their telepathy doesn't work, Miles said. The lead-line pipes and the rock density create natural dead zones. Our source knows that. It's a neutral ground. They grabbed their gear, including the crystal, and slipped out of the CIB office. The colony was quiet, but the air felt thick with unspoken tension. As they drove towards Sector Gamma, Miles couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The entrance to the old aqueduct system was a rusted, graffiti-covered hatch in the middle of a dusty, undeveloped lot. Inside, it was dark, damp, and smelled of wet earth and metal. Miles switched on a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. They were in a large, circular tunnel, the floor lined with a shallow channel of stagnant water. The silence was absolute. They followed the source's directions, moving deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels. The air grew colder. The psychic pressure that was a constant presence on Providence began to fade, lifting like a fog. For the first time since he'd arrived on the planet, Miles felt like he could think clearly, without a low-level hum in the back of his mind. They arrived at a large junction chamber, a cavernous space where several tunnels converged. Standing in the center of the chamber, illuminated by the beam of their flashlight, was an Aethel. She was younger than any Aethel Miles had seen, though with an immortal race, age was a relative concept. She wore the simple white robes of a civilian, but her movements were less fluid, more nervous than the others. Her silver hair was cut short, and her twilight eyes, so like Kaylin's, held not serenity, but fear. "You are Miles Corbin," she said, her voice lacking the usual telepathic resonance. It was just a voice, and it trembled slightly. "And you are Dr. Thorne." "And you're the librarian," Miles said, keeping his distance. "My name is Lyra," she said. "And you are in more danger than you can possibly imagine." "Tell us about the enforcers," Eris said, stepping forward. Lyra's eyes darted towards the dark tunnel behind her. "They are the Harmonizer's secret. They are the ones who ensure the perfect harmony. They are telepaths of immense power. They don't police behavior. They police thought. They find aberrations, discordant thoughts, and they silence them. They erase them. It is called the quietening." A chill ran down Miles's spine. A thought police. It was the oldest totalitarian trick in the book, just dressed up in fancier technology. "Valerius," Eris said. "He was an aberration?" "He was a heretic," Lyra corrected, her voice filled with a strange reverence. "He believed our perfection was a cage. He believed we had lost something essential. He was searching for the silent song, the original state of our consciousness before the great harmony was imposed." "The silent song?" Miles repeated. "Our history is a lie," Lyra said, her words coming out in a rush. "We were not always like this. We were once chaotic, emotional, like you. But our ancestors, in their quest for stability, created a system. A psychic network that regulates emotion, enforces conformity, and maintains peace. It is called the chorus. We are all nodes in the chorus. It is the source of our serenity, and the source of our prison." She looked at the data crystal in Eris's hands. "Valerius found a way out. He found a frequency. A thought that could disrupt the chorus. A single, pure note of discord that could shatter the symphony. That is what's on that crystal. And that is why he was killed. Not by an enforcer, but by the chorus itself. It identified his thought as an existential threat and terminated him. The mimetic virus. It wasn't a weapon from an enemy. It was a suicide note. A key to his own cell, and the cell of his entire species. They will be looking for this," Lyra said, her gaze fixed on the crystal. "Kaylin is the head of the enforcers. He will not stop until he has it, and you, erased." "We can't open it," Eris admitted. "The encryption is tied to Valerius's consciousness." "I know," Lyra said. She stepped closer and held out her hand. "I was his student. His acolyte. He shared everything with me. Not his thoughts, but his new patterns. I can be the key. Let me try. It was a monumental leap of faith. This could be a trap, set by Kaelin to retrieve the crystal. But Miles looked into Lyra's eyes and saw the same thing he'd seen in countless informants over the years, a desperate hope for something better. Eris looked at Miles, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Eris carefully placed the crystal in Lyra's outstretched hand. As Lyra's fingers closed around it, she gasped. Her back arched, and her eyes went wide. The crystal flared with a brilliant, blinding silver light, bathing the entire chamber in its glow. Miles and Eris shielded their eyes. They could hear a sound now, not with their ears, but in their minds. It was a scream. A single, pure, agonizing scream of psychic energy. It was the sound of a mind being torn apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light faded. Lyra stood swaying for a moment, her face pale. Then, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed to the floor. The data crystal clattered onto the stone beside her. Miles rushed to her side. She was alive, but unconscious, her breathing shallow. Eris knelt beside the crystal, her face a mask of shock and horror. What happened? Miles asked, checking Lyra's pulse. It opened, Eris whispered, her voice trembling. For a second, it was open. And I saw it. I felt it. She looked up at Miles, her eyes filled with a terror that mirrored the look on the dead harmonizer's face. It's not a thought, she said. It's a question. A simple, childlike question. And it's the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. Lyra came to a few minutes later, disoriented and frightened. She remembered the flash of light and the overwhelming psychic scream, but nothing more. The connection had been too much for her. The key is broken, she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. I am sorry. I could not hold it. It's okay, Miles said, helping her sit up. You did more than enough. Eris was staring at the crystal, which now lay inert and dark on the floor. What did you see, Eris? Miles asked. What was the question? Eris took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. It wasn't just words. It was a concept, an idea, wrapped in pure emotion. It felt like loneliness. A profound, existential loneliness. And the question was. She hesitated, as if saying it out loud might give it power. What if I am wrong? Miles frowned. That's it? That's the weapon that can shatter a million-year-old civilization? A little self-doubt? It's not just self-doubt, Eris insisted, her voice gaining strength. Think about it, Miles. Their entire society, their great harmony, is built on the premise of absolute certainty. They are right. Their way is the only way. The chorus, the psychic network, reinforces this certainty every second of every day. It's the foundation of their reality. To introduce the possibility of error, to suggest that the entire foundation of their existence might be flawed, it's not just a question. It's a logical paradox. It's a virus that attacks the axiom of their being. Miles looked at the dark crystal. He was beginning to understand. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of liberation. And for a society that didn't know it was a prison, liberation was the same thing as annihilation. So, Valerius discovers this question, and the chorus kills him for it, Miles reasoned. Kaelin and the enforcers cover it up to prevent the question from getting out. We steal the only record of it. Now they're hunting us. And they will not stop, Lyra said, pulling herself to her feet. You cannot comprehend the threat you pose. You are not just holding a piece of data. You are holding a philosophical bomb. We have to get it to Governor Sharma, Eris said. She needs to know what we're dealing with. This isn't just a murder investigation anymore. It's a first contact with the real Aethel. No, Lyra said sharply. You cannot. The enforcers have influence. They are already manipulating your governor. They will twist this. They will claim it is a human weapon, a mimetic attack designed to destabilize their society. It will be the perfect pretext for them to sever the alliance, or worse, to pacify the human colony for its own good. She was right. It was the perfect play. Discredit the evidence, and then use the very existence of the evidence as a justification for a crackdown. So what do? Miles asked. We can't just sit on it. We need to find a way to weaponize it, Eris said, a steely resolve in her voice. Not to destroy them, but to force their hand. We need to find a way to broadcast it. To ask the question of every Aethel on this planet. All at once. That's insane, Lyra breathed. The psychic backlash would be catastrophic. It would tear their society apart. Maybe it needs to be torn apart, Miles said quietly. He thought of the serene, doll-like faces in the consulate, the oppressive silence, the enforced peace. He thought of the burnt taste of his coffee, the messy, chaotic, but free nature of humanity. A cage is still a cage, no matter how pretty it is. The Aethel Communications Spire, Eris said, her mind already working. It's the central hub for their interplanetary network. It has a massive psychic amplifier. If we could interface the crystal with the Spire's primary transmitter, we could broadcast the question to the entire Aethel collective, Miles finished. We could start a revolution. It's a suicide mission, Lyra said. The Spire is the most heavily defended location on Providence. It's where Kalen and his enforcers are based. You wouldn't get within a kilometer of it. We don't have a choice, Miles said. They're already hunting us. We can't run forever. We either use this, or they take it from us. He looked at Eris, then at Lyra. We need your help, Lyra. We need to know everything you can about the Spire's security, about the enforcers, about Kalen. Lyra looked from Miles's determined face to Eris's resolute one. She saw in them something she had never seen in her own people, a willingness to risk everything for an idea. For freedom. She nodded slowly. I will help you, she said. Valerius's work cannot be for nothing. The silent song must be heard. They spent the next day in the relative safety of the aqueducts, planning. Lyra provided them with detailed schematics of the communications spire, information she had access to through her former role as a junior archivist. Eris worked on a way to interface the crystal with the spire systems, a complex task of adapting human technology to alien psychic hardware. Miles, using his old police skills, planned the infiltration. It was a heist, but the prize wasn't money or jewels. It was a question. Their plan was audacious and relied on a lot of luck. They would create a diversion at the main power grid, drawing the bulk of the automated security away from the spire. Then, a small team, just the three of them, would infiltrate the spire through a maintenance shaft that Lyra knew about, a shaft that was shielded from the chorus's psychic surveillance. Eris would head to the transmitter room at the top of the spire to make the broadcast. Miles and Lyra would provide cover and deal with any physical security. It was a long shot. A very long shot. That night, as they were finalizing the details, Miles's burner unit chimed. It wasn't a coded message. It was a direct, unencrypted text from Governor Sharma. It was 3 words, "They are coming." A moment later, they heard it. A faint, rhythmic thumping from the tunnels around them. The sound of booted feet. They weren't just being hunted. They had been found. They found us, Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with terror. How? Doesn't matter, Miles said, his voice calm and steady, the old detective taking over. Time to go. Plan B. We don't have a plan B, Eris said, already packing her gear. We do now, Miles said, pointing down a dark, unmarked tunnel. Lyra, you said this whole system is a maze. Good. Let's use it. Eris, you and Lyra take the crystal and get to the spire. I'll lead them on a wild goose chase. No, Eris said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We stick together. That was the plan. The plan is busted. Miles snapped. They know where we are. They'll be swarming this place. I can draw them off, give you a chance. And what happens when they catch you? Eris shot back, her voice just as sharp. They'll quieten you, Miles. They'll turn your brain into mush. We are not sacrificing you. The thumping grew louder, accompanied by a new sound, a low, psychic hum that vibrated in their teeth. It was the enforcers, and they were closing in, their minds sweeping the tunnels like searchlights. She's right, Detective, Lyra said, her voice trembling. The enforcers are not like your human police. They cannot be outrun. They will tear your mind apart to find what they are looking for. Then we fight, Miles said, pulling his sidearm. It was a pathetic gesture, and he knew it. This way, Lyra said, pointing down another tunnel. There's an old service elevator. It leads to the surface. To the old industrial sector. It's been abandoned for years. It's a place of noise. It might be enough to shield us. They ran. The sound of their splashing footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnel, a frantic counterpoint to the methodical thud of the enforcers behind them. The psychic hum intensified, a pressure building in their skulls. Miles felt a wave of vertigo, and the walls of the tunnel seemed to ripple and writhe. They're trying to disorient us, Eris grunted, stumbling. Fight it. Focus on something real. Miles focused on the cold, hard grip of his pistol. He focused on the anger simmering in his gut. He focused on the memory of his father's workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil, the sound of a blues radio playing in the background. He clung to the messy, imperfect, beautiful chaos of his own memories. They reached a dead end. A rusted metal door was set into the wall, with a large, circular wheel for a handle. The elevator, Lyra gasped, fumbling with the wheel. It was seized with rust and decades of disuse. Miles and Eris threw their weight against it. It groaned in protest, but slowly, it began to turn. The thumping of the enforcers was deafening now, just around the corner. The psychic pressure was immense, a physical weight that threatened to crush them. Miles saw things out of the corner of his eye, shadows that moved like men, whispers in his own voice telling him to give up, that it was hopeless. Almost there, Eris grunted, her muscles straining. With a final, screeching lurch, the door swung open, revealing a small, dark elevator car. They piled in, and Miles slammed the door shut, throwing the locking mechanism. A second later, something heavy slammed into the door from the other side, a metallic boom that shook the entire car. The elevator shuddered, and then, with a jolt, began to slowly rise. The ride up was agonizingly slow. The car groaned and protested, swaying on its old cables. They could hear the enforcers on the other side of the door, their telepathic assault a constant, pounding headache. It's not working, Lyra said, her face pale with fear. The noise isn't enough. They can still feel us. Hold on, Eris said, her eyes closed in concentration. She was fiddling with the data crystal and her scanner. The crystal, it's still resonating with the question. It's a beacon. They're homing in on it. She opened her pack and pulled out a small, lead-lined box, a container for transporting sensitive electronic components. She carefully placed the crystal inside and sealed the lid. The psychic pressure in the elevator car dropped instantly. The pounding in their heads subsided. It worked, Miles said, breathing a sigh of relief. They've lost the signal. For now, Eris said, her expression grim. They'll tear this entire sector apart looking for us. We haven't escaped. We've just changed the game. The elevator lurched to a stop. The door slid open to reveal a scene of urban decay. They were in a massive, abandoned warehouse. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that pierced the grimy skylights high above. The air smelled of rust, damp concrete, and something else, the faint, greasy scent of fried food. They were in the forgotten heart of Providence, the industrial sector that had been rendered obsolete by Aethel technology. It was a place the perfect, clean Aethel never came. It was a human place. Where are we? Lyra asked, her voice filled with awe and disgust. She had never seen such organized chaos. Welcome to the Real Providence, Miles said, a grim smile on his face. The part they don't show in the brochures. They were fugitives. They had a weapon that could shatter a civilization. And they were hiding in a place where the sky was hidden by grime and the only harmony was the distant, mournful wail of a freight train. It was perfect. They spent the next week in the shadows of the industrial sector, a ghost in the machine of the colony. Eris used her skills to patch into the local, unsecured networks, creating a false trail that led the enforcers on a chase through the colony's underbelly. Miles, using his old cop instincts, taught them how to move without being seen, how to read the city's forgotten rhythms. They found an unlikely ally in a man named Silas, a grizzled former mechanic who ran a black market depot out of the warehouse. Silas was a man who had seen the promise of the Aethel alliance and found it wanting. He missed the grease, the noise, the satisfying clank of a well-made engine. He saw in them not terrorists, but kindred spirits. The Aethel, they gave us paradise, Silas told them one night, over a meal of reconstituted protein and synth booze he'd brewed himself. But a man can't live on paradise. He needs something to tinker with. Something to fix. They took away our problems, and in doing so, they took away our purpose. Silas gave them shelter, supplies, and most importantly, a workshop. Eris, with Silas's help, began to build the device they would need to interface the crystal with the Aethel spire. It was a bizarre fusion of human and alien technology, a jury-rigged marvel of engineering that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and a prayer. In a way, it had. Miles spent his time gathering intelligence. He watched the news feeds, saw the official narrative being spun. Harmonizer Valerius's death was now being attributed to a human-born mimetic agent. Aethel news channels, with their serene, hypnotic anchors, spoke of the tragedy and the unstable, dangerous nature of human thought. The alliance was straining, cracking under the weight of fear and misinformation. Governor Sharma was walking a tightrope, trying to placate the Aethel while preventing a panic among the human population. She was being set up to take the fall. They're isolating us, Miles told Eris and Lyra one night as he scrolled through reports on a salvaged datapad. Kalen is painting us as rogue agents, terrorists. He's using our own chaos against us. We have to move soon, Lyra said, her voice tight with anxiety. The longer we wait, the stronger his position becomes. And the more he will quieten to find us. She had told them more about the enforcers. They weren't just a police force, they were the high priests of the chorus. They were the ones who could reach into a person's mind and not just read their thoughts, but rewrite them. The quietening was a process of psychic erasure, leaving the victim a placid, empty shell. It was a fate worse than death. Miles agreed. They couldn't wait. Their plan to infiltrate the spire was their only card. The diversion at the power grid was set for the next cycle. That gave them 24 hours. 24 hours to prepare for a suicide mission. That night, as Eris put the finishing touches on her device, Miles took a walk. He needed to clear his head, to breathe in the familiar, polluted air of the industrial sector. He found himself on a rooftop, looking out at the city. In the distance, the Aethel consulate and the star spires gleamed under the lavender sky, a perfect, alien jewel. Below him, the human sector sprawled, a chaotic jumble of prefab domes, flickering neon signs, and tangled power lines. It was ugly. It was messy. It was home. He thought about the question on the crystal. What if I am wrong? It was a question humanity asked itself every day. It was the foundation of science, of philosophy, of progress. It was the engine of doubt that drove them to be better. To the Aethel, it was a virus. To Miles, it was the definition of being alive. He heard a footstep behind him. He turned, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. It was Eris. "It's ready," she said, her voice quiet. She held up a small, complex device. It was a patchwork of human wiring, Aethel data ports, and a custom-built psychic amplifier that looked like a tuning fork made of crystal and wire. "It's not pretty," she said with a wry smile. "But it should work." As long as I can get it patched into the primary transmitter, it will broadcast the question on a loop. A psychic feedback loop that should be impossible to shut down quickly. What about the enforcers? Miles asked. Can they stop you? They can try, Eris said, her eyes hard. But the initial broadcast will be instantaneous. It will be like a flashbang. It should stun them, give us a window to get out. And then what? Miles asked. What happens after we ask the question? Eris looked out at the city, her expression troubled. I don't know, Miles. No one does. We're about to perform an experiment on a planetary scale. We're about to introduce freedom to a people who have never known it. It could be the birth of a new, better society. Or it could be the bloodiest revolution in history. Or they could just all shut down, Miles said. A million-year-old civilization brought to its knees by a simple question. Either way, Eris said, her voice barely a whisper. The world will never be the same. The next cycle, they moved out. Silas gave them an old, beat-up cargo truck, its engine rumbling with a satisfyingly human cough. They drove towards the city center, towards the gleaming spire that was their target. The plan was simple, which is to say, it was insane. Eris and Lyra, with the crystal and the broadcast device, would go in first. Miles would follow, providing overwatch and creating a secondary diversion if needed. They would be relying on Lyra's knowledge of the spire's layout and Eris's technical genius. They would be relying on luck. As they approached the city center, the air changed. The psychic hum of the chorus grew stronger, a constant, oppressive presence. The streets were cleaner, the buildings more elegant. They were leaving the human world behind and entering the Aethel one. The diversion started on schedule. A massive, cascading power outage plunged a third of the colony into darkness. Alarms blared across the city. Automated security drones were rerouted to deal with the chaos. It was their window. They abandoned the truck in a service alley and made their way to the spire on foot. The Aethel Communications Spire was a masterpiece of alien engineering, a slender needle of crystalline material that seemed to disappear into the lavender sky. It was beautiful and terrifying. Lyra led them to a small, unmarked service entrance, hidden in the shadow of the spire's base. As she had said, it was shielded from psychic surveillance. From here, we are on our own, she said, her hand on the access panel. The internal defenses are not automated. They are enforcers. Miles nodded. He drew his sidearm. Let's go introduce them to a little human chaos. The door hissed open, revealing a corridor of the same pearlescent crystal as the rest of Aethel architecture. It was silent, empty. Too empty. They know we're here, Miles whispered, his instincts screaming. They're waiting. They moved down the corridor, their footsteps the only sound. The air was cold, and the psychic pressure was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the corridor ahead of them shimmered. A figure appeared. It was an enforcer. He was tall, even for an Aethel, dressed in simple, unadorned gray robes. He had no weapon. He didn't need one. He raised a hand, and a wave of pure psychic force slammed into them. It was like hitting a brick wall. Miles grunted, his vision swimming. Eris cried out, stumbling back. Lyra screamed, a sound of pure terror. The enforcer's mind was a cold, hard, focused thing. It was a tool of the state, devoid of emotion, devoid of pity. It reached into their minds, sifting through their thoughts, their fears, their memories. Miles saw his past flash before his eyes, his first arrest, his first kill, the face of his partner as he bled out in a Chicago alley. The enforcer was using his own memories against him, amplifying his guilt, his doubt. You are a failure, a voice whispered in his mind. You bring only chaos and pain. No, Miles grunted, forcing the words out. I bring freedom. He focused on the anger. Not just at the enforcer, but at himself, at his past, at the universe. He focused on the raw, untamed emotion that was his birthright as a human. He thought of the blues, of a wailing guitar solo full of pain and joy and defiance. He threw that thought, that feeling, back at the enforcer. It was like throwing a rock at a ghost. But it was enough. The enforcer staggered, his concentration broken for a split second. It was all the opening heiress needed. She had her own scanner, a modified version of the one she'd used at the crime scene. She pointed it at the enforcer and activated it. It emitted a high-frequency pulse, a burst of psychic white noise.